Welcome to Youth Can Change the World. I'll be talking today with Desmond Dinkins and Chris Cole, who are the founders of the African American Abstract Association. They're trying to make sure we have more African American history in our public schools, and they're starting with Washington, D.C. I'll be talking to them about how this is not only good for African American students, but it is good for everybody if we really want to understand the history of our country. Desmond, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Pleasure to be here, Nathan.
And Chris, thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, sir.
I'm really excited to talk to you guys because I actually have a background in education, and I notice what you're talking about, that there's not a lot of African American history in most curriculums in the country. We learn the basics, but we never get much below the surface.
Right.
So I'm curious about the moment or the time period where you guys recognize that this is something that's really important and that you wanted to do something about it.
Right. Yeah, so it was definitely more of a time period or a process than like a specific moment. Going all the way back to sophomore year, us being currently seniors, where we were given the assignment in our humanities class to do a persuasive speech on any controversial subject, mine being on the lack of African American history in high schools. So that was just kind of an experience as far as research. I found a lot about what I, as a student, have been missing out on for so long. It really piqued my interest, and I just wanted to do more and more and more research. So the more research I did and the more I wrote and the more I recited my speech, the more, hooked I got onto the subject.
Nice.
And from reciting the speech, that's the experience that I got, but also gained an opportunity with our teacher who gave us a recommendation to join a social entrepreneurship program, LearnServe, which kind of guides students with their social ventures in order to get their ideas up and running. And from that, Chris wanted to be partners, same idea.
Yeah, to add on, Des and I were both in this Humanities 2 class that we were taking our sophomore year. So when we were assigned to do the persuasive speech, we both had our speeches centered around African American, the African American community, and we had both actually been credited for how well we had spoke to the class. And as junior year came along, we were both recommended by the LearnServe teachers at our school to participate in the LearnServe program, and through LearnServe they gave us the platform to make a abstract, and that's why we're here today.
Right. That's wonderful. So that speech in that sophomore class, is that the first time that you guys made the case that we need more African American history in the schools?
Right, right, and that's what kind of kindled the flame, to be honest, and as well as kindled the flame within me. While we were starting LearnServe, I simultaneously signed up for African American history at my school, School Without Walls, which is actually one of less than a handful of schools in D.C. that even offer it, of course, as an elective. And just that experience itself was just, it was very eye-opening, and in a lot of cases, overwhelming, because I'm learning so many things that are so deeply tied to things that I've already previously learned, but never had the opportunity to kind of, delve into in class.
Yeah, absolutely. I also just want to acknowledge that LearnServe, once you got into that program, you also gave your speech at the LearnServe Gala because you were chosen from all the LearnServe students that came from all over the city to speak at the LearnServe Gala because you are so passionate and because you speak so well about the importance of having African American history in our curriculum.
Thank you,
Thanks.
I'm curious about specific inspiring stories that you started to uncover that you were not taught before you started to do this research because of a fairly exceptional teacher in 10th grade.
10th grade year, correct? We went to the Thurgood Marshall Center. A teacher at our school, Mr. James Cunningham, who had recently won Teacher of the Year last year within DCPS, had given students at School Without Walls the opportunity to go to the Thurgood Marshall Center to participate in this workshop that Mr. Anthony Browder was hosting. And in this workshop, Mr. Browder talked about the African influences that can be seen in D.C. During this, workshop, he mentioned how the Washington Monument is actually an African symbol. And before this workshop, at least in my opinion, and I believe in Des for you too, this is the first time that we had heard about this, even like being a thing. We wouldn't have any reason to doubt otherwise that the Washington Monument was just there to commemorate George Washington, and it's just we didn't think about seeing a symbol. Yeah, we didn't see
really
about,
big.
we didn't think about if we saw it other places what it could mean or what's the history behind it. And to dive deeper into the history about it, before Egypt was called Egypt, it was called Kemet, and in Kemet there were two gods or kings, a king and a queen, so to speak. And one's name was Osiris, and the other one's name was Isis, but her, African or Kemet name was Aset. And Osiris and Aset were, they saw each other as equals. Whenever he would leave the kingdom to her. Like she could watch over it, and he knew with great pride that she would do a great job. Osiris's brother, Set, he was very jealous of this. He was like, I don't see why I can't be king. I can do the same things that he can do. And so through that jealousy, he killed his brother Osiris and chopped him into 14 pieces. When he did this, he scattered the 14 pieces throughout the land. And Aset was so saddened by this that she decided to collect all the pieces that she could find, but she could not find the 14th piece, which was his genitalia, which was...
Now I see the connection to the Washington
Monument. Right, almost. The 14th piece was thrown into the Nile River, and supposedly catfish had ate it, and it was nowhere to be found. The gods were so impressed by her devotion to her husband that they allowed his spirit to visit her in the night to consummate their marriage. Through this, she gave birth to a son called Horus. Horus is one of his main purposes of his life was to avenge his father, and in doing so, he killed Set, and he rose up to the heavens, told his father, I've avenged you, and I want to make a monument to, honor you and commemorate your legacy, and that monument was for the Greek term is obelisk, or a tekken is also what it's called. But that's what you see in D.C. now, the Washington Monument.
Yeah,
wow, that's
so it's certain things like that. You don't realize the influence behind it, knowing that it came from the obelisk, and then the origin story to the obelisk. And it's just things like that that are so hidden and so closely, weaving to home, where we live, that people are just ignorant about. And it's not, and so it's the African American Abstracts Association to take on the responsibility to educate people on the history that exists, that's that they pass by every day. They don't even have any idea.
It's seen as just a part of our culture, the Washington Monument, and that's cultural co-optation.
Exactly.
When you forget the roots.
Right.
And in teaching the roots, you're making it actually deeper. It's actually better for everybody.
It's more authentic.
If you look up the term obelisk on Google right now, you would see an image with hieroglyphics on it, and that's because a lot of these symbols were taken out of Egypt, taken out of Africa, and placed all around the world. So now you see them, but you don't get the same history, the same meaning behind them, and it's very important. So,
that's right.
Yeah.
I believe we were also talking about something with George Washington Carver that I never read. Do you want to take that one, Des?
Yeah. So it's also in the fact that there's so many figures in history, and there's so many, hidden contributions that they made, such as George Washington Carver, where people, you see him in the history books, you kind of just think like, oh yeah, the Peanut Man.
Right.
But
that's what I thought before I talked to you guys.
Exactly. But even before Henry Ford, there was George Washington Carver, who made a very large contribution to the automobile industry before there even was an automobile industry.
Right.
So what was that contribution?
Well, the Patterson Car Company, which was a car company ran by blacks during this time that we're talking about, had actually made better Model T cars than Henry Ford. And the only thing that was missing was being able to mass produce these products. At that time, people were making cars one piece at a time, and as you can tell, it probably wasn't as effective with a growing industry, a growing environment.
You'd have to charge a lot of money for a car like that.
Right. Too. George Washington Carver, who he grew up around not that many people that looked like him. It was he grew up in a majority white neighborhood, and went to a majority white school. And to make a long story short, the only time that he was really around black people was when he went to Tuskegee. He and Henry Ford actually had a business relationship, and he had went to Henry Ford and he had told him, hey, I have this idea where through this you can make more than one car at a time. And that's why Henry Ford he's not credited with the production of the Model T, he's credited with the mass production of the Model Ts. But even then, he got the idea from George Washington Carver, who we only know for peanut butter, which, as good as peanut butter is, it would be nice to know that maybe the Ford car company could have been the Carver car company.
Yeah, it could have been the Carver car company.
Yeah, so.
It kind of rings better, too.
It's alliteration.
Carver cars, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about why it's important for students, be they African American or from other races, to have more African American history in our curriculum?
Right.
Throughout the year, we have been doing a bunch of research on that question in general, because that's what we anticipated to hear the most of. Just like, well, why is it important? Like, why does it matter? Sometimes we'll get like, okay, why learn African American history when
why doesn't this matter?
Yeah, right. Like, it's like
we get that a lot.
Yeah, but to make a long story short,
sort of like when people say Black Lives Matter.
Right.
You're not saying that other lives don't matter,
That's
but
the same
Black
analogy.
lives matter.
Yeah, I make that analogy a lot as well.
Through our research, we found out that when kids of color take ethnic courses like ethnic history courses, they actually improve in all of their classes. Yeah, like not just history, but math, sciences, so on and so forth. And that's because they feel connected to what they're learning. Sure. Similar to in our elevator pitches, which we have an acronym for, which is ECE, empower, connect, and engage. And that's what we hope to do through these curriculums. You have like many African history courses, like Philadelphia, I believe.
Right, yeah, Philadelphia actually made it mandatory for their public schools before they even graduate to take African American history as
All
a
the
course.
students.
Right, everyone has
awesome.
to.
Yeah. And in terms of other children, except, not including children of color, it's important to learn this aspect of history. Currently, history is being taught from a Eurocentric perspective, so the term history is literally his story. You're only learning it from one perspective. Mm-hmm. Whereas in order to get the full picture of something, you should, be able to hear many different sides to the story to be able to piece the truth, the actual truth together. Like if you had only heard from this one man's perspective about Henry Ford, you hear what you hear now, which is Henry Ford is responsible for the mass production. But if you hear from someone who, was around George Washington Carver at that time, you would hear that he had, something to do with it as well. And this history is important because not only does it answer the things that we see in our community today, but it helps us look at our future through the lens of history to correct those mistakes that we may make in the future, right. To be able to build better relationships amongst each other, disregarding the race, disregarding, but, not forgetting our history. But,
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so just to reiterate, it's definitely a concept of identity initially, especially with students of color. I can say that myself from personal experience. I remember like for an interview that I had to do for a specific high school, coming from middle school, they asked me the question of, what subject was my least favorite subject. And I like without a doubt, immediately said history. And like I could never put a finger on why. Why didn't I like history? Why was I so disinterested? Because there was a disconnect that existed between myself and what I was reading. And to know that if that's happening with me, that's got to be happening with so many other students. So, and even at that time, I wasn't even conscious of the fact that there was even an opportunity for me to learn this type of information that I've been missing out on for so many years. You start learning history in first grade. So essentially, At that point in time, it was about 9 years. So when I got the opportunity and I did the research, I immediately jumped in, and like the first day of class was just overwhelming, like I had said previously.
Yeah.
And then that presentation that we had talked about, that we went on the field trip for, that was overwhelming as well. And that was a very long presentation, not because I was disinterested. Everyone was hooked. Everyone in the room was hooked.
Yeah, it was. You could just see them just feeding into the presentation.
But after a while, you could just tell that everybody was just drained from all the information that they were learning, because it hit so close to home. It hit so close to things that you had already been learning. That's like saying, like, you know, if the past, somebody showed you a picture of blue and told you it was blue. But if somebody introduced a new idea that's so related to that concept, it's just going to blow your mind. And you're just trying to figure out how to deal and how to cope with all this new information. And I think that's just how everybody was reacting. So just to give that type of opportunity to, you know, all other DC students, that's just exactly what we're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, and you hear, when I was working in schools, I would hear people talk about closing the achievement gap.
Right.
And they would have that conversation without talking about including more African American history in the curriculum. And we have studies from all these schools that have done it that show that when you do that, the achievement gap closes because you're engaging more people in their history. And from a perspective as a white person, I understand history a lot better since I've been a little more open to this, and I still have a long way to go.
Right.
But if you just look at your history from one perspective, you don't get the whole picture. Just like if you look at an elephant from the back, you're not going to see the trunk.
Exactly, yeah. And something that I always thought was important also is it's very essential not to start one's history from slavery, because you're limiting them to what they can achieve. And you know, if you start their history to know that, you know, there was once a time where we were kings and queens and so on and so forth, and it's very important so that we know ourselves and that we can look up to other people other than what we see in the media or, you know, on TV. Not to say that they're all bad, but not to say that they're all good either.
Right. And those media influences, like as hard as it is to believe, that's like things like that circulate even outside of the United States.
Exactly.
Where Chris had a recent experience when he visited Zambia. I'm gonna let him talk about that because I think that's very important.
Please, yeah.
This a friend that we have. Both of us went to Zambia through Learn Serve Abroad, and during my time there, I, you know, being such a fan of history, in contrast to Des, which I can understand though why he didn't like history, but
you like it more now though.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. But you know, when I went, I talked to. I actually got into a conversation about African American history, which I didn't know we were leading into, but it just sort of happened.
And this is with a person in Zambia.
So a young lady in Zambia.
An African woman from Zambia. Yeah.
And she was telling me my history. She was saying after slavery, blacks have resulted to crime, and then she had later on in the conversation, you know, we had talked about how, you know, that wasn't true. You know, after slavery, blacks started to build their own communities, build schools, churches, so on and so forth. That's why you have like Baptist gospel music. So now, like, you know, because of those contributions. But then we also talked about how she thought that many African Americans today were involved in gangs. Majority. And I was just like, I kind of like stepped back for a second because I was offended. I was like, you know, I'm not in a gang. My friends aren't in any gangs. Then I began to realize, you know, they see these perceptions, they hear about these misconceptions about African Americans, similar to how African Americans or Americans hear misconceptions about them. And I began to realize during my time, you know, just the power of that media has over us, you know, and the power that the media has in general to be able to, I want to say, brainwash people in a sense to what they can see around them. During our presentation at the Learn Serve Fellows program, we had a sign of Africa, the true size of Africa, and in that sign you could see that you can fit the United States along with China and many other countries
Wow.
all into this one continent, just to give people the idea of, like, you know, you're thinking of Africa as this little place
Right.
that the whole continent is
Dust.
sand huts and villages and so on and so
Poverty.
forth, right?
It's not like that at all.
Right, and I was watching a movie this morning, and this guy had said, you know, he was trying to represent the idea, but in doing so, he kind of brought it down. He said, you know, you have to think about that boy in a village in Africa. And I was just like, where in Africa is he talking about? That's like me saying some guy in North America. Are you going to know what guy I'm talking about?
Some
North
white
America?
guy in his underwear watching football on a Sunday morning.
Right.
It's just
like,
total
okay,
stereotype.
yeah.
You know?
So,
Yeah.
but you just have to be conscious of that.
Right. I also realized that you have a blog on the LearnServe page about your Zambia experience. And you talked about visiting some of the landmarks of Zambia, like Victoria Falls, which is the way that we know it. And I'm curious if you'd be interested in sharing some of those reflections that you made.
I went to Victoria Falls while I was in Zambia, went on a safari tour. And I was smiling just because I'm glad that you read it, for starters. And it was a great experience in total. Like, you know, as a collective, we can say that the African American Abstract Association has been to Zambia and has been to Beijing, which is, you know, really cool to say. But through Victoria Falls, I met a lot of the tour guides there and, you know, sparked some conversations. And I found out that the original name for Victoria Falls is, I believe I'm pronouncing it right, is Mose Otunya, I believe.
That
it may
sounds
not be.
good. I wish
yeah,
I
I
knew,
know.
but
It does sound good, but I believe that's how you pronounce it. Nevertheless, it's not Victoria Falls, which is where I compared it to their history, to our history. The name of the town that Victoria Falls is located in is called Livingston. And Livingston was named after a British colonizer that it came, and he had named it for himself. Now, mind you, he had said that he had discovered this land, even though people already inhabited that land. Similar to how Christopher Columbus came and discovered America, even though people were already inhabiting America. But yeah, and I began to realize just even how I can be on a whole nother country, on a whole nother continent, I can still see similarities to home. And I began to look at the environment differently. I began to, you know, question why are we taught this, and you know, just making connections to home, which kind of helped me find myself, helped me find, like, you know, identity-wise myself, and just, you know, try to center myself again. So it was a really great experience.
It sounds like, in going into depth with the experience in Zambia, from a perspective of someone who's interested in getting more African American history recognized, it also helps you empathize with American Indians. You know,
Right,
when you get
Which is
into
part
your
of my
own
heritage.
history in a real way and not just a surface, you know, superficial way, it helps increase empathy.
Right.
And I'm curious, on that note, you got to go to Beijing, and obviously that's not Africa, but what do you think that experience did affect you and how you're thinking about getting more African American history into the schools?
Yeah, just because I was talking about how certain influences that come from America, you know, hit in other locations, and an experience that I had in Beijing. It was a really hot day. We were climbing the Great Wall, and I noticed a lot of Chinese people wearing like sleeves. Like they would have short sleeve shirts on, but they would have like these little, like kind of similar to like basketball shooting sleeves on, and like on their arms and on their legs, you know, on their, like kind of on their necks. And I was just realizing, I asked our tour guide, I was kind of like, you know, like, aren't these people like really hot? We're climbing the Great Wall. Was that for like absorbing sweat or something? And he was like, you know, actually it's for, you know, their skin complexion, because in China, you know, lighter skin is a reflection of higher, you know, higher class symbol, essentially. So regardless of whether you're out in the heat, you know, getting a natural tan, something that you can't really help, these people are out here, you know, probably like sweating like crazy just so they won't get, you know, just a little tan.
Wow.
And I just thought that was an experience that I thought that was
Yeah, that's
very
deep.
interesting.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, it shows you how, unfortunately, color of people's skins is an issue throughout
Right.
the world.
Right.
I'm curious, how have you guys been following the opening of the African American History Museum, and how does that fit into your work? Cool.
We have. And actually, the same teacher who took us on the field trip to the Thurgood Marshall Center is hosting a field trip to take us to the African American
When it
Museum.
first opens, yeah.
Yep, when it first opens. So that's going to be a really good experience. And we're going to make that trip kind of like a mission for the African American Abstract Association
Yeah.
to, try to connect with as many people as possible while simultaneously, absorbing all the information that, we get to find in the museum. So it'll be a great experience. But as far as connecting and networking with a lot of people, that's something that we've really been doing in the past year, since we started. And it's been a huge part of like the foundation of trying to make accomplishments. So, networking's, it's essential, and it's like the initial step to, starting a nonprofit or starting just a social venture.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of ideas that we've had on the way, such as we've started a podcast series.
Nice.
That we did do the first episode, and we're planning on making more. Planning to do such events like when we went to the Thurgood Marshall Center. We figured that so many other people need to learn this information.
Absolutely.
All of this Afrocentric influences in DC.
Yeah,
So,
you're kind of helping people recognize all the resources
Right,
that are there. That
exactly.
seems to be part of your mission, as well as getting the curriculum into the schools.
And some people even recognize DC as the Black Mecca of America.
Yeah, Chocolate City.
Chocolate City.
Yeah.
Right, exactly. So
It's crazy to me that there's only a few schools that teach African American history in
Chocolate City,
Chocolate
right?
City.
Yeah. So we're
That's a whole nother conversation.
Yeah, it really is. But we've come up with the idea of doing like a tour, similar to like a field trip, where we take people around, like, there's like certain tours around DC, just for like sightseeing. But this one specifically would be a tour where you do go sightseeing, but you see the influence and you see all of the story behind these monuments and these huge monuments of architecture. We're planning on launching oratorical contest or something similar to that among DC schools, where students would be given the opportunity to go through oratorical workshops where they would learn information as well as learn speaking skills.
That's fabulous.
But with the subject revolving around African American history, where they would compete within their own schools, and then they congregate finally in the district.
With a big event.
Exactly.
That sounds amazing. I really appreciate having you both on the show.
Thank you.
It was a lot of fun. I learned a lot.
Yeah.
And
Can we give like a few shout outs?
I want you to give, this is the time to give your shout outs.
Okay.
And also, how can people find you
Right.
on the internet, on Twitter, wherever?
Well, first things first, we got a shout out for teachers.
Yeah, the teachers are so essential.
Yeah, Miss Perez Conlo, Miss Briggs,
Mr. Cunningham,
Mr. Cunningham, and Mr. Jones.
and potentially Mr. Bullock.
Yeah, Mr.
too.
Bullock as well.
You hear that, Mr. Bullock? Potentially.
Right. Right. But we want to give a big shout out to them, because without them, just being on, well, not necessarily being on us, but guiding us in school to take this path has been great. We want to shout out Scott and Sabine from Learn Serve.
Yeah.
We also want to shout out just our parents, just for
Definitely.
giving us a great learning environment growing up, because that was very important to where we are now, and in you as well, and everybody here in the studio for giving us this opportunity. Yeah,
I'm just honored to be able to have you guys on the show, and thanks again for being here.
All right, thank you, Nate.